It's cold, raining. People find cover from the rain under trees and at bus stops. It was late October. We were getting a humongous amount of rain this season, more than we had gotten in years. I hated rain. Screw the weather. They never cut us a break, or gave us a little sunshine. But I'd rather just be a man and deal with it than wait at my work all day. Thankfully, I brought my umbrella. Well, I borrowed someone else's without telling them. I looked out the window of my work to see the woods that stood facing my work. It looked a lot more dry than where I was coming from. The woods were a place I like to be. I never paid attention to tales of the masked lunatic with a chainsaw killing kids, because the woods were nice, especially in the fall. Well, if it wasn't raining, of course. Birds chirped, squirrels ran about collecting food for the winter. The leaves started to change. The winter was a different story, however. My house was on the other side of the forest, and on the other side of my house met a bit more wooded area. Obviously, I let people know I went through the woods and always carried my cell phone. I always took the trail that cut through the woods to get home. I didn't mind it. It only took me 20 minutes on bike. I lived on a quiet street, one house every 30 meters. Nice, quiet neighborhood. You could sunbathe in the street, if we ever had sun. A car would drive by every so often, never thick traffic. I usually took my bike to my work, unless it was raining, of course. I left through the back of the house every morning, which was met with a large wooded area, which on the other side met my work. My work was facing the woods, separated by the street. Not that busy, but large. Behind the office building were cornfields. Boring, small-town America. I worked at a car dealership. Never any customers. Slow days, low pay. People would come for car pickups and whatnot, but never any sales. It was raining today, though, and I decided to walk home because of how much mud piled up, and I didn't much care for cleaning up the mud from between my tires and gears in my bike. The walk seemed fairly long. I was 1/3 of the way home when I saw an opening. The opening was completely surrounded by large and small trees, but it seemed really peaceful. It was definitely strange. I'd never noticed it before. It was just about 20 meters from a regular path. The rain had let up. A gust could be felt as I stepped into the large grassy field. It smelled of pollen and wet bark. Not the worst smell. You could tell it had stopped raining by the smell alone, but the sky was still dark. Large, dark gray clouds, highlighted with a light turquoise, indicating lightning was soon to come, despite already raining being accompanied with lightning, followed by thunder. As I stepped into the opening, the first thing that I noticed was the breeze. The grass seemed dry, but not brittle, almost like crabgrass. The wind blowed each blade of grass, creating a wave-like illusion, like most grass did when the wind blowed. There was a haze past the trees on the other end of the field. The wind came from the west and blew to the east. It felt very comforting. It wasn't humid. It seemed a bit more chilly than normal, which was strange, because it's usually humid and a bit warmer after it rains. The vibrant clouds faded and disappeared as the skies dulled with gray clouds that hid the sunshine in baby blue skies. The wind died for a moment, and the eerie silence was ear-bludgeoning. But the wind picked back up, moving at about 10 miles per hour, which was just right. I saw what looked to be a small junkyard in the distance of the field. I trotted over to it, holding the handle strapped around my chest, supporting my messenger bag with all my work in it. When I got closer, I saw it wasn't a junkyard, but a playground. It was rusted, smelled kinda bad, obviously abandoned, and quiet. It was sorta creepy. It gave me a sense of unease. The playground was small. There were 2 swings, a slide, monkey bars, and a tire swing. Off to the side was a small concrete water fountain, surrounded by more concrete, with 2 drains on both sides around it. I grabbed the chain on the swing and swayed it back and forth a bit. The chain was stiff and the paint was chipping. I sat down in the swing, but it broke beneath me. I got up and brushed off the debris from my sport jacket. In slight embarrassment, I tested the other swing and took a seat. Luckily, it could support me. I gazed off into the rest of the field. The sky was darkening, but it was still light out. As I stared off into the field, I noticed something behind a few trees at the other end of the field. I walked over to it, which took about 20 minutes, but when I got to the end, I saw it more clearly. It was a small cabin. It was in poor shape, with a door lying on the ground in front of the house, and the windows boarded up. I tiptoed in, but the creaking of the floors was inevitable. I called out to see if anybody was in the cabin with me, but nothing responded, just an eerie silence. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the cabin was a parka hung on the coat hanger. It had fur on the hood, polyester layers, and a dull, dusty gray color on the outside. I walked out to the back of the cabin and saw another opening, but this one was extremely small compared to the other one. It was about 20 meters from one end to the other, with more dense woods behind it. There was a deep hole dug in the back. When I went to investigate it, I saw a small box, the size of a cereal box. I opened it up, and I saw a few items. I looked through them and realized that this was a time capsule. I found a letter which dated back to 1915. It was apparently from a World War I soldier who was drafted into the war. I continued to search through it, only finding a diary of a young man, a comb, a pocket knife, a woman's coin purse, and a can of Spam. I quickly lost interest because of distraction. I noticed they didn't bother burying it, whoever left it. But what I did notice was a violently and hastily dug hole with scratch marks. It looked as if someone was pulled out as they were doing it. I ignored it, trying not to get myself worked up. I walked around the house, back into the opening. I exited the field and returned to the woods, where I continued my walk home. When I arrived at the house, nobody was home. My wife wasn't present, nor my daughter. Right before I called their names out, I remembered they had gone up to my step-parents' house for the week. I cooked a frozen pizza, watched some Netflix, and drifted off into sleep on my couch. I awoke to the ceiling fan slowly spinning above my head. I looked to my side and saw the window open and the curtains blowing slightly. It smelled slightly like mildew and it was cold. My head was the only cold part of my body, and my naked feet. It was about 5:45 a.m. The sky was twilight, and dawn was near. I saw that the weather had cleared. A few light but fluffy clouds hovered in the troposphere. It was also pretty chilly tonight, about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind blew from the north. There was no fog in the least. Like every morning, I hopped on my bike and rode on my way to work. Except this time, I had realized I had left my messenger bag in the playground. Halfway on my bike ride, I was looking for the opening, but it seemed there was nowhere to be found. I searched for a while, about 30 minutes. I almost lost the trail going off to look for it, but I came to my senses and realized I wasn't going to find it anytime soon. So I dreadfully went to work. I decided to go to work anyway, despite not having my bag with all my paperwork used for closing sales I had arranged the day before. It was better to be unprepared and on time been unprepared and late. Arriving at work, though, my boss seemed to be as angry as he was puzzled as to why I was missing my work. So was the customer. I was fired that day for losing a sale due to my own personal negligence and was asked to leave the property by security, which I personally found to be a bit ridiculous. I walked around back, despite being restricted from entering the area to retrieve my bike, of which I had locked up on back. I walked around, though, to a horrific sight. The wheels on my bike had been stolen, presumably. I started on my way home through the woods when I realized I was about halfway home, and there I had seen it. The opening. The opening was off to the side a ways, but I decided to walk to it out of further curiosity. It was truly amazing that after being fired, I still had the same enthusiasm and curiosity of the opening as I had before. My whole world had just came to its knees. One would have questions such as, where will I live? How will I support my family? Will I find a new job soon? Yes, there was still some sort of a driving force that continued to push me, even if I hadn't wished to be pushed. As I walked into the field, I felt a ringing in my ear, and my vision grew weary. It seemed as if I had gotten up too quickly, but I had regained my senses after continuing to walk into the opening. I then looked up the hill to see the playground. That's where I was almost certain I had left my bag. Funny thing is that I was looking for it, even though it was of no use to me in the least, because of my duties being relieved at my work. But shouldn't I at least get to the bottom of why I lost my job? When I arrived at the top of the hill, I was greeted by the foul stench of rusted metals and the annoying squeaks of the swings that drafted in the gusts of wind that appeared every so often. I inspected the area anxiously, awaiting some sort of sign. A sign of what? Something to break the tension? As my inspection continued, I noticed a paper on the ground. It was crumpled, torn up a bit in the ends. This was not the only piece, though. In fact, there were several pieces of destroyed paper, but the paper seemed familiar. Well, not the paper, but what was on it. It appeared to be my work papers, the ones that I was missing. They were in my messenger bag. The letters and numbers on it, though, seemed distorted. They were mixed up in no particular order. It was extremely baffling, but I followed the trail. I was not derated. I was angry, is what I was. Angry and confused. But I didn't blindly follow it with a magnifying glass to my eye, not paying attention to where I was going. I looked at where the papers led to. As I recall, I didn't have such a ubiquitous amount of papers, but without question, I traversed across the field, descending from the zenith of the hill, where the playground was located. I followed it back into the cabin. Before entering, I inspected the outside. I even walked up to the window to take a look inside. It looked more decayed than it had been before, though, and it smelled awful. It smelled like death. However, this was just what it smelled like, in a figurative way. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to witness. As I walked in, the stench grew worse. I nearly wanted to vomit. I looked around. I noticed the coat rack next to the dusty table. It was missing the gray parka previously spotted on it. I knew I hadn't taken it, and the place was clearly hidden from the rest of the world. It looked as if it hadn't been touched for decades, but it was gone. I do distinctively remember the jacket, though. It was dull. It had black buttons, and looked as if it had a tiny bit of dried blood on it. But I remember on the pockets, there was a symbol. It looked to be a gang symbol of some sort, or a religious symbol. It was a circle with an X in the middle of it. The creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet grew louder with every step. The air was thick. The mood was eerie. The light was dim. The sun had faded away, so I relied on my cell phone to light the way. All I knew was that I was trapped with whatever light in the house with me. I walked into the living room, positioned behind the dining room. When I looked up, I noticed beams supporting the roof. The thick wooden beams were dusty and ready to fall. I looked back at where I was going when I realized I was still walking. It would be haphazard to not watch where I was going in such a dark space. I took a step further when suddenly I felt my face meet the cold, dusty, splintered touch of the floor. I managed to get up though. I wondered if I had slipped, but I was pushed into the ground. Getting up, I felt a cold, dead hand on my back push me back down. I felt a cold, metal feel on the back of my neck, lightly touch it, then be quickly lifted. I quickly rolled out of the way to see a blade go through the floorboard. I looked up to see a masked man. He wore the parka I saw earlier, and I recognized it quickly. I knew I was in trouble, so I quickly swung my fist into his stomach and heard a loud grunt. I saw it as an opportunity to run, and I took it. I sprinted to the door, but I forgot my cell phone. I felt my foot trip over a table leg, along with the sounds of creaking and cracking of wood. I felt myself trapped, gasping for air. The dining room table had fallen on me, and it was quite heavy, along with the loss of air. I felt myself losing blood, fast. My vision started to go. My ears were ringing. I felt like static in my ears. Everything grew hazy and loud. The man walked over to me, wielding a machete of some sort. What I noticed about him, as he stood over me, was the symbol I had seen earlier on his neck. I looked how after you have a scar and it heals, it's kind of pink. It was a circle, which had been crossed out, like earlier, but in the blink of an eye, he was gone. But as quickly as he went, police siren appeared in the distance as the red and blue lights lit up the room, flashing through the cracks of the boarded up windows. The door was kicked open to the sight of a rather large man with a flashlight in one hand and a hand on his holster, ready to pull out his gun. I cried for help and then ran to me. I apparently received an anonymous tip. Later, I found myself in the back of an ambulance with an officer. I woke up after being unconscious for about 30 minutes. The officer tried explaining to me that I was in trouble. He told me I was under arrest, and that they had found several bodies with my DNA on them. Looking back on it, there were a few people who had gone missing earlier that month. My neighbors, 3 houses down, had all gone missing. So had a gentleman who worked at my former job. Also, it appeared my wife and daughter had been found killed. I was accused of being a serial killer, and they had evidence to put me away. In that court, though, they played the anonymous tip. As I listened to it, I knew there was no hope for me. Well, it's been 8 years since then. My trial was a bust. I got the death penalty. My last words are being recorded as I speak right now. But as I sit on the table, waiting for my lethal injection, I looked at the spectators of my execution. I saw a few men and women, obviously the families of the victims, but I looked at them until I noticed someone who got my eye, and suddenly I knew who it was. As I looked at the man sitting in the back, I noticed he had black hair. It wasn't that long, a small scar on his forehead, a stupid grin, and a gray parka on the back of his chair. He had a light stubble. He was easily 5'11". He had a dark red t-shirt on as well, and I swear, but he looked older. He looked to be in his mid-30s, a bit taller than the man I encountered that fateful night, but I swear that he was the man that did it. And as I felt the belt tightly being wrapped around my arm, my vision started to go. like how I did that night, encountered him, and all I could hear was a static ringing. And as I felt the needle get put into my arm, all I could hear was a static from whom I call the Aberrationist.